welcome back to PA Truck Up. I'm your host Manny, and today we have Alex. Hi, Alex. How are we doing?
Good. How are you, man?
I'm good. Thank you so much for coming. I know we've kind of been speaking offline for a little bit, but just before we get started, if you let everyone know who you are, what you do, and how you got to where you are. Have you ever wondered how I'm able to run my business, my podcast, and still be able to coach? Well, I use TeamBuildr. TeamBuildr is an all in one coaching software that reduces the amount of time that we spend on the back end of programming, on our Google Sheets, on our Excels, and allows me more freedom to do testing. With this podcast and episodes, I'm actually able to run some programs that I learned through different coaches coming on. To find out how you can use TeamBuildr and how it can apply to your own program, visit the link in the description and catch yourself a 30-day free trial. Just simply use code PACHOCUP, that's PACHALQUP, and start the next stage of your coaching career.
Yeah. Alex Beljic. I'm the Assistant Director of Sports Performance at USC, University of Southern California. I currently work with women's soccer, our women's and men's swim and dive teams. The way I got here was a little bit traditional, a little bit not, but I started strength conditioning in 2013. I was an intern for my junior community college at Scottsdale Community College back in Arizona. And from there, I kind of fell in love with the world of strength conditioning. From there, I actually didn't do any GA ships or anything like that up until about I want to say 2017. I was doing CrossFit, and I was a head coach at a CrossFit gym, an intern, a head coach, and all that stuff for about 4 years. About 2017, I found Cal State Fullerton. Cal State Fullerton was my second strength conditioning internship, which I turned into a graduate assistantship, which I turned into an assistant role, which I turned into an interim director role. I stayed there for about 6 or 7 years, and then came down here at USC for the last three.
Before we move on, I either have to boo you or congratulate you for CrossFit. So if you let us know exactly your formulas, I can either boo you or congratulate you.
That's awesome. Yeah, people give it slack all the time, man. But I love that time. It was just transitioning to something competitive, and I think
Mm,
when you transition from a sport, I played a little bit of basketball growing up, but when you transition from that into CrossFit, it just gave me kind of those tools to have,
mhm.
and just kind of kept that edge going for a little bit until I found my true passion, right, which was
Yeah.
college strength conditioning.
To be fair, what I will always say is so I'm not a big fan of CrossFit, and that's well documented within
It's
these
fair.
podcasts. But my grief with it comes from inexperienced coaches coaching people who have never touched the barbell, and they're expecting them to go snatch and clean and jerk and do all the Olympic side of things to inexperienced people that have never tried it. But again, I'm going to presume that you progress them slowly through it.
Yeah, I mean, so part of the reason why I got back into the strength conditioning field was because I was looking for ways to learn and get better at what I did as a CrossFit coach. So once I got into a point where I was a CrossFit head coach, it was like, hey, who does this stuff better than what we do in the CrossFit field? And I looked at Andy Galpin and all those people back in the day, and so I just went out and you know what can I do? I'm going to go back to school, finish my BS, get some, exercise physiology in there. Next thing you know, that led into the internship at the collegiate level. Next thing you know, I'm like, whoa, these guys are doing stuff really good. They're progressing cleans, right? Progressing snatches. They're teaching me the underlying fundamentals, which may have skipped over a little bit, may have not, right? But it's not, again, not to harp on CrossFit. It's not a complete, fundamentally sound
Mhm.
program to begin with. But I think the good coaches do end up looking out. And I think that's what happened, with me
Yeah,
essentially. It was I was looking for information, and that got me into
yeah,
whoa, there's this whole other world of performance that I completely forgot about that I interned for, in 2013. And then coming back in 2017, I'm like, okay, this is where I need to be if I want to get better.
yeah. I mean, the pathway is quite nice as well because, like, I've noticed with, I mean, this will be the 95th episode, and then like I've done other side project episodes, so we're over 100, and the best coaches I've ever spoke to have been ones that have had that public general pop experience. And again, I'm a great believer that yes, you need to know the fundamentals, how adaptations work, stress works, stimulus. You need to know all that stuff and the science and the how the body reacts to things. But you need the soft skills, and you need to know how to motivate someone that doesn't want to be there to want to be there.
We're a service oriented profession, right? So like I think the soft skills are so important, and it's something that still doesn't really get taught, right? That I think we need to, and some
Mhm.
of us innately learn those skills from being in a service oriented field beforehand. So I think it's definitely an advantage for sure.
100%. I think that's where, again, well documented, but I sometimes rag on accreditation bodies because they do miss that part where professional pathways that we have to have, but it's more focused on knowing the nutritional values of food and some of the science of it, as opposed to, hey, can you coach someone that doesn't like back squat or just can't, isn't a great mover to back squat? Yes, no. But before I go on my tyrants about them, you also do female football, not
Hmm.
soccer,
Football,
football. If you
European
let us,
football.
yeah, yeah, no, 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 it's just football.
I love it.
You know,
Hopefully, I don't get.
this is
Hopefully, nobody hears me. I don't get fired.
this is actually something that me and the guys at UW got into frequent arguments about. They would call it like soccer, and I'm like, what's that? And now I've just carried it to the podcast too. But if you kind of let us know like what you do with them and how you phase out their um, programming and season with the obviously collegiate and NCAA demands.
Yeah. I can speak to. We're almost in preseason, so I kind of speak to where my brain's at with that. I think first and foremost, like anything that I do is going to be holistic. So, meaning like we're looking at the totality of, what are we getting ready for, and not necessarily just the game itself, but what is it going to feel like, how long, kind of like what it kind of puts us through. So, with that being said, we have about 6 weeks left. We are just now kind of starting to trickle back into training in terms of our preseason training before our first day of practice. And so the first thing we do is we kind of establish, the basics, which is your basic squat, hinge, push, pull, whatever it may be. And then we get into the culture setting of it, right? So energy, effort, attitude is a big one for us. We get into, what kind of things do we need to do to take care of our bodies? What kind of food do we need to get in? Our nutritionist is on deck as well. So all those things. And then as we kind of get deeper into it, we start rolling out the footballs, and we start playing a little bit, and really getting into. I'm lucky enough to have Catapult here, so like we can actually measure how much we play in practice, and then so we try to kind of, even though I am a or a strength coach, I'm not a sport coach, right? We can kind of have these voluntary practices where we're trying to hit ideal distances and things like that to kind of get us rolling into our first day of practice for us. And then does that kind of answer your question?
Yeah,
Very
yeah.
general way.
Yeah, no, it was a broad
Yeah.
question because it's sort of different everywhere, but soccer does tend to be a year-round um, sport. So if they're not playing with their college, they're playing with their home teams, or um, they're just playing constantly. So how does that sort of impact your preseason? How long do you usually have to prepare them for the collegiate season with them?
Yeah, so I mean, so to zoom out from this like 6 weeks left until practice, right? Like we're really in three big phases. Our first phase is our fall season, right? So that's where we play. That's usually August through November, or mid-November, or December, if you're lucky enough to make it to the end. And then we have this kind of like small period of rest in December, which is really our rest time. And then there's the spring phase, right, which is usually 6 games or so that you can play against teams that don't really count for anything, right, in the college sector. We're just kind of playing to practice for the fall. And then that's kind of our development period. And then there's this summer period, right, where we have anywhere from May to July before we really hit this hard 6 week preseason period that we're trying to get before we get ready for first practice. And so within that, like for us, like as USC, we're lucky enough to have kids kind of go in and out of each period, like all the time. I have a kid going to national camp. I have two that are going to national camp this next week with the U.S. national team under 20s. I had a couple that are whether we're national camp at you know Canada, Portugal, Spain, whatever it may be. So we're lucky enough, yeah. So we're lucky enough to have all of those. But it's really just integration and just looking at their volume and reintegrating them back into what we're doing. And then expecting right what they're going to get into over at camp. So camp's usually just going to be a high load, low load day. It's going to be like high low, high low, high low, or it might be something similar to that. But there's going to be a lot of stress, a lot of volume. So we try not to do too much the week before, right? And then when they come back, we may take a day or two off depending on what their data looks like. Generally, we get their data back pretty soon.
Mm.
Mexico, again, another country that we have 2 or 3 players that are doing camp there currently. Um, but we'll get their data right away. And so then I can just reintegrate them based off of that. If we're kind of now, right, 6 weeks before practice, we're kind of starting to ramp up. Let's say somebody goes to camp. Um, if the camp wasn't necessarily deemed as too high from what we've been doing, we'll just kind of integrate them back, right? If the camp was like really, really high, then we'll take a few days off and then integrate them back that way. And the few days off really depend on how they're feeling subjectively, right? I never always take that into account. And then how much they did as opposed to how much we do in a week or how much they did before that. But I think that brings up a good point. Like, I think something we do well here at SC, and it's really what I try to do well here at SC, is like we take the load management year to year very seriously. Like, we don't just look at, hey, you're looking at the fall and that's all we care about. Or we don't just look at, hey, we're looking at the spring for these 6 weeks, for these 6 games. That's all we care about. It's like, what does your load management look like holistically in a whole year? Have you taken a break at any point? And then how can we get you to where we need to get you so that when fall comes, you're ready to go with us, um, and then going forward, right? So to get off on another tangent, like I think we
I
did
like that.
good,
Keep going.
good. I've had some coffee, so but
You're wired.
we've had kids that we've had to meet with national teams, for like, hey, like when is this kid's time off?
Mm.
And I think that's super important because again, if we take them and we just manage them as USC and their national teams manage them as national team players, well, and they're doing both, now they're burning, the candle at both
You can
ends,
on
and
both
that candle
ends.
is going to go. So I think it's super important to kind of see that whole picture, right?
What data are you specifically getting from these teams, and what do you do to then integrate them slowly back into SC?
Yeah, it really depends on the team. Some of them are medically a little bit more uh, uh, detailed than others, which is great. What I'm looking for really is just the objective GPS data at most times, and then we'll stay in touch with the athlete to be like, how do you feel? That's our subjective RPE scale, whatever you want to call it.
Mm.
So objectively, we'll look at total distance. We'll look at high speed running, right? Those are our big markers. If they have heart rate monitors on them, even better. Like we can look at that and look at the intensity from that way. We'll look at sprint speeds. I like to track sprint speeds over time, like top sprint speeds over
Mm.
time, even though it's positionally, like sometimes you may go to camp and play a different position and you play with us. If they're consistently lower and lower and lower, I kind of take a look and see if there's any fatigue involved. So I like doing that as kind of like a measure of accuracy, right? Or fatigue, just because it's kind of similar to like a force plate, right? If you jump on a force plate and your, eccentric peak force is down or something like that. So we'll look at those. We will look at that's pretty much it from a GPS standpoint. We try to keep it simple, like 3 to 4 metrics
Mm.
that pretty much everybody
Nice.
collects, and then we'll do in house more, obviously.
But see, I think that's where a lot of teams are currently going wrong. And it's they're wanting to track everything. Like everything has to be tracked and everything has to be measured to some um or compared to some other thing. You kind of just get bogged down with all the noise. Like if you
Yeah,
measure one thing and you measure that thing really well, and that can obviously change depending on if you're in preseason, in season, off season. But like having those couple metrics that really speak to you and you understand and you know what to do with them, I think you get a lot more bang for your buck with it.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. I mean, from my perspective, it's a little different too because of just the time that I have, the time involvement that I have with these things. Like I am the sports science guy as well as the strength conditioning coach,
Mm,
as well as other things as well. So it's like, and I have other teams. So the metrics that I look at, I only have time to maybe even look or dig into a couple things as opposed to really take a deep dive, right? Teams that have like two or three sports scientists on their team and really want to get into it and dig deep into those metrics, it's more available for me. Like time constraint wise, like I just best bang for my buck is just a couple simple
mm.
metrics, and then move on from it, right?
So, kind of a two-part question. With load management, how do you phase their preseason demands to match what they're going to do in season? And then in season, how do you manage a little bit more of that load depending on obviously competitive demands? Obviously, some weeks will be easier than others, other weeks will be tougher. So you kind of need to manage that as well.
So the biggest thing we do is I've been lucky to be here for 3 years, so I have 2 years of week one data. Um, Traditionally, soccer teams in the collegiate sector will have camp weeks, so they'll have like
Like soccer.
sorry, football teams. There you go. See,
I
I've been
got
here
you.
too long. I've been here too long. Um, Football teams will have right 2 weeks of camp weeks to start the year before they play their first game, and so we'll have two a days and all that stuff. So the way I'm building my load management is basically I look at that first week and I try to get them prepared for that first week within the 6 weeks that I have with them. And so the first 5 weeks or so, we may traditionally build that volume up, kind of like a linear progression of volume.
Mm,
Week 6 is going to be a deload week because I know it's coming, and then week 7 we're up and rolling, and we have 2 days of camp. For us, just just shooting roundabout numbers, it's probably anywhere from 28 to 32K distance
mm,
wise, and then I think about high intensity sprinting would be anywhere over 12 miles per hour, probably be about another 1500, so another
mm,
1.5K, and then probably about 2 to 300 meters of sprinting, like which is 80% above your sprint, um, in that first week. And then we actually do a good job of building up to that volume, resting, and we've seen a pretty good, I would say, I'm always worried about the uptick in soft tissue injuries, but
mm.
we generally last, knock on wood, our camp pretty good.
So that's
Been working.
another part of it that I don't think gets spoken to enough. But obviously, the demands of conditioning can be somewhat mitigated in the gym and how we prepare them in the gym. Can you sort of walk through what you do? Again, more running sports, we kind of have to pay a little bit more attention to posterior chains than we do anything else. How are you sort of phasing that out?
In the weight room.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So notice, like, I haven't talked about the weight room at all, right? I think then that's for me, like, my brain works holistically. Like, I'm just thinking it about like what are my key objectives that I want to get to, and then the weight room is really right, like more about, hey, can we get a little stronger? Can we, can
Mm,
we increase resiliency, and all those things, and then maybe perform slightly better, right? So have our elastic and dynamic movements in there as well. But so the weight room piece for me is again, we'll really go simple to start off with movement competency, especially with incoming
mm,
players, and then those that haven't. Again, we train year round, so it really starts on in the springtime. We really try to build up this kind of, um, I would call it movement library, right? Where you're doing your, let's say it's a progression of like a
ABCs.
goblet squat, front squat, back squat, yeah, ABCs exactly, and then from there. Depending on so one of the fun things that I do with my teams is I kind of test them. I believe that athletes are in like two different types of athletes. There's really more than that, but just to keep it simple, like an elastic, right, dynamic, really
Mm,
fast driven athlete, and then like more of a strength driven athlete. And then so we'll kind of individualize from there. And so the programs might look a little different, but within those 6 weeks when they come back here, it's really just kind of meet them where they're at first. So if they've had camp or things like that, we'll do more regenerative stuff, and build that volume tolerance up to lifting. And if they haven't had that, we'll, again, or if they've been kind of rolling, then we'll just kind of keep progressing on whatever qualities we feel are important for them. So right now I have like two, maybe three programs running, maybe four. And then, so obviously, our incoming freshmen too as well. They're just still learning the ABC, so they're on that January phase, and then
Mm,
they quickly ramp up to season. So it may look a little different for everybody, but I think the overlying arching team is about 2 to 3 times a week in the weight room, depending on your
nice.
schedule, if you're playing a game or not, because some of us are still playing, USL or whatever it may be. And then we'll do 2 or 3 times of conditioning where we'll add that high intensity speed running and some of the sprinting as well. And then we'll underline the practice. So if we're here on the field, we'll actually do a little bit of sport specific practice as well as like our Mondays, like our linear days. So we'll do a little bit of sprinting, Tuesdays lateral, Wednesdays off, Thursdays more rotational, kind of multi-directional, and Fridays more competitive. So we'll underline and do maybe like 20 or 30 minutes of warm up slash, some kind of whatever the theme of the day is in terms of movement prep to get them going. So that's kind of the big picture of that.
Mm,
And then I think in the weight room coming back after, so we'll do that. We'll go practice soccer, football, and then we'll go, in the weight room, and then we'll hit whatever the topic is for the day. It's mostly total body. I like Zatsiorski a lot, if you know what that is. So I do a lot of dynamic stuff, max effort stuff, repetitive, and then I just kind of like layer it. I almost consider this our in-season block in a sense. So we'll just layer depending on what the movement library is and where they are in their year of any of that stuff. So it might be like a med ball toss, or it might be a clean. Then you might have a split squat or a squat, whatever it may be. And then for repetitive effort, it might be like injury prevention stuff, like a Copenhagen or whatever it is, right, to get us going. Does that
how
kind of
much
give you a
do you
picture?
love yeah, 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 100%.
Good.
Copenhagen suck.
Yeah, got to do it.
Exactly. When you're in season, what are some of the ways that you maintain that load and maintain some of the attributes that you try and build during their preseason?
Yeah. So GPS metric wise, I think for us, like we have this kind of average rolling number that we roll with, right? So whatever the volume is that we built up in our first 2 weeks of practice, and then we just kind of try to maintain that depending on if we have 1 or 2 games, right? So if we have 2 games, I guess I should start saying by just big credit to my head coach. She's really good at periodization. So she helps me a lot. Like we have high days, low days, medium days. Like we have a 9 out of 10 RP, 7 out of RP, a 5 out of 10, a 4 out of 10, and a 1.5 out of 10. And then we understand the general understanding is that the game is 10 out of 10. And so we'll kind of layer our RPE days. She does it to her credit, and then what I'm doing on my end is just back checking that 4 out of 10 RPE day is looking like the way it needs to be looking like on the GPS
Mm.
side. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
Um, and so then we'll do that, and then we'll match up our high intensity days. So in season, the way we have our basically if you're familiar with like the Daniel Bo's like quadrant system, we'll have a quadrant system where we do
yep.
when she has a 7 out of 10 day, like that's my day to do strength work. When it's a 9 out of 10 day, it's like that's my day to do speed work. But we don't necessarily have too often of those in season, right? When we have our 1.5 out of 10 day, then we'll have we'll do recovery. It's basically recover, repetitive, or whatever it is. So really try to match it up that way. It turns out to be pretty good. Again, I don't have to do much, especially now, like year 3, year 4. Like we're in a good rhythm where I don't, expect to do much adjustment because we kind of have an idea of what each day is,
Mm,
and we do a pretty good job of sticking to the script. I think it kind of takes the emotional side out of it, right?
mm.
And so we can really kind of plan out our season's already planned out. We can plan it out and look at it, and this is exactly what we're doing on what day, and sticking to the load.
Yeah, so it's a little bit more about the refinements of day to days as opposed to building stuff out
100%.
as you're going along.
100%. Just small adjustments, I think, work. I think if you go, too far away
Too
from the
far.
plan, whether it's coaching, whatever, like it could be in the weight room, it could be on the field, wherever, then, our athletes are smart. They're going to smell that. They're going to be like, oh, they don't know what they're talking about, right? So
Mhm.
small refinements, small adjustments, and just getting ahead of things when we need to.
I love talking about the heart rate zones, and you kind of alluded to fatigue recovery. How do you protocol that in when they have had a high day, and now they're kind of needing a little bit more of the recovery, a little bit more of the the nicer movements.
Yeah, so if I'm hearing you right, in season, so what we have is a recovery day, and that is separate from an off day. Okay, so we have an off day and a recovery day, and in our recovery day, we actually want most of our players to get to about zone one or zone two,
Mm,
just to get heart rate wise, just to be able to move around, get a little bit of sweat in, get sub out, whatever you want to call it. Now it's not called lactic acid, whatever you want to call it, soreness. And so our kind of recovery region day is super important to us because we approach it with that. And then again, we can even work a little bit of tissue capacity. We can sneak it in there when we want to as well, right? That's kind of the way we get some of our repetitive stuff in season. But again, like I think for us, it's important to move around the day before a game or the day after a game, and so that's kind of the way we do it. We understand that a game is going to be in that zone four, zone five, right? Most times, especially even if you're not playing. And
mm.
so we understand that the day after is going to be a little bit more. We need to get zone one, zone two, just a little bit of work just to be able to kind of flush out some of the stuff that we need to flush out.
You've sort of touched on the tissue capacity stuff. Can you walk through like your usual protocols or something that you do try and sneak in there?
Yeah. I hope she's not listening to this. But even if she is, again, our coach is good at, again, she's very good at periodizing. But again, because we understand the demands of the game, we don't necessarily, just as any other classical collegiate soccer program, we don't necessarily understand that, tissue does tend to, disintegrate and get weaker and smaller and
Wear and
softer
tear.
if we don't do
Yeah.
anything with it, right? Um, and so for me, it's really just building it up from the ground up, like super basic. Like you have your push, you have your pull, horizontal, vertical, upper body, lower body push, single leg. The lower body push for me is a squat or a single leg squat, and then you have your RDL, right? And then you have your RDL. You have your lower body pull, which is an RDL from the hip dominant side of the hamstring, and then the knee dominant side of the hamstring, which is some
Mhm.
kind of a hamstring curl, whatever you want to call it. So those little things not necessarily have to be loaded by any means, right? But we'll go through the basic movement ranges, lateral as well, right? Rotational. We'll go through the basic movement ranges and then put some load on it if we can. If we
Mm.
feel like that's the day that we're gonna, hey, we can push it a little bit. Cool. We grab a med ball. It might be like 20 seconds of something, and then we move on to the next component of it, and then we move on to the next for 20 seconds. And then kind of going that way. And then if we feel good, we'll put a dumbbell on it, and then
Mm.
go for it from there. But I think sneaking in some of these, right, like a little bit of tissue capacity where we put a little bit of load on it, be like remind our bodies, like, hey, you're still strong,
Mhm.
you still got to move. There's still stress to be had a little bit to
Yeah.
adapt to. Don't just get comfortable with playing the game and sitting on your butt on the buses to and from. So that's one way we do it. And then again, we trying to get whether it's a strength session or any kind of generally a strength session every 2 weeks or so, just because our schedule allows it. So
Mm.
like a really hard traditional strength session. I think for that, just because again we will never have more than 2 weeks where we play two games in a week. So we might
Mm.
have 2 weeks, and then in between those, we might make sure that we hit our strength quality so that even if it goes down a little bit, it's not as bad.
And I think as well, like with loading systems, I always like to, and you kind of alluded to it as well. So having that like knee dominant and hip dominant is usually the best example that I can give. Is like having both ends of that strong as well helps mitigate some of the degenerate stuff that happens throughout the season,
Yeah.
right? So when we're in season, again, Coach AJ put us the best, and preseason we're sort of just like building an armor around them, right? And then during each competitive game, it gets chinked a little bit, and it's our job to then repair that chink, and that's just maintenance work throughout the season. But like one of those little armor pieces is being able to have strength from like the insurgent to the origin, like having that whole muscle strong from short end to long end. And I think that's an important piece, especially with running dominant sports. where you are having to overstride, you are having to turn quickly, you are having to change directions and again reach overreach most of the times as well. There was this coach that I used to watch a lot. He was doing some work where I'm from, and he had this great method of um, injury mitigation, and it was essentially like so isometric coming out of isometrics, doing some eccentric works, doing some plyos, and then doing some ballistic works. Like that was his steps to mitigate an injury. So it could start with like just a simple iso, like if it's soccer, uh like a just a like a glute ham on the box, just pushing down. But by the end, they'll be on bands just kicking. Like I
Yeah.
think that's quite good as well to introduces that variety of speeds through this muscle.
Yeah, and I think it's good. We actually so we do something similar. We'll go eccentric in the spring for about 4 weeks, and we'll do that for our meat potatoes lift or other lifts as well, and then we'll go isometric for 4. And I really found like it's hard to get a stimulus or to feel good out of an isometric, right? Especially if you're doing it
Mhm.
like if you're loading it. But we do it, and I'm kind of nervous that hey, they're not going to like this phase, but they actually end up liking it the best. And then we go into like this concentric ballistic work, right, where we're doing stuff for speed and introducing velocity and all those things. So that's in our movement library. But yeah, I love approaching it that way, and I love approaching it like you said, like long to short, or
Mhm.
distal to proximal, whatever it is. Trying to check all those boxes. Like I'm a generalist, so like for me, like can I check as many boxes as I can to all these things, all this training, and then we use all of that. We try to use all of that once season starts, and then it's like my toolbox is challenged because I have kids coming in. Like we also go on like an individual basis a little bit. So
Mhm.
especially our reserves that don't play, like they'll come in a lot more often, and then those that do play that need a little bit of whether it's like prehab or rehab work for if they do have those kinks in the armor, right? They'll come to me as well. So I'll try to kind of solve those issues with those boxes, right?
Mhm.
Isometric, eccentric, concentric, and it's usually isometric or eccentric because we're in season. We're doing concentric, right? And then trying to attack it. Like let's say it's a hamstring straight and it's a grain one, right?
Mhm.
It hurts. It hurts distal, but doesn't hurt proximal. Like okay, cool. So now I know it's more. It's more on the knee side, whether the hip side. So then, okay, how do we get that going? And so, yeah, I think it's super important to understand all that stuff because at the end of the day, like you should end up using it to help you later on.
It's something that I've been speaking about recently, and it's like there's a couple different analogies that we use. It's the tools in the toolbox. It's the roads to Rome, and it's the skin the cats. But
Yep.
like, there's also no issue in you having a map that has the different routes to Rome, or having different methods that you can skin the cat, or being able to pick out the tools accordingly. And I think it kind of goes back to what we were sort of talking in the lobby as well, is like attending conferences, attending workshops, attending things, and how we can a identify what tools we're perhaps missing, experimenting with those tools on ourselves first, and then from there you're kind of like, okay, let's trickle this into the program. um so, kind of my question now is, how do you pick out what you can from conferences? How do you sort of experiment with them, and then how do you apply them to your program?
Yeah, great question. It's a big one because it kind of goes back to like we. This is such a relatively new field, right? Like we don't know anything still. Like we're what 100 years old in terms of strength and conditioning, maybe not even. And in terms of physiology, like people were digging up cadavers like what 300 years ago, right? So it's like we don't necessarily know anything. And so I think it's like the first thing is like it's just important to keep an open mind. Like just because somebody has a contradictory opinion to you, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're right or wrong, and it doesn't necessarily mean that it didn't work or it did work. Right? It could be a completely contradictory opinion, and it could have worked, and then your opinion could work as well. But the underlying principle is probably wrong for both, right? And then we still haven't figured out why it is the way it is, right? And so we're in like this predicament, I think, as an industry where it's like there's really no point in picking sides because
Mhm.
10 years from now, who knows? Like somebody might have been right, even though they were wrong now. But that also is very confusing, right? And so I think a couple things that I like to do is super challenge myself in terms of, if there's a point that I'm not agreeing with, I try and go seek out like just one point of discomfort. Like I don't have to do it for the whole conference, but like to say, this speaker, like I didn't like what they were saying. I try and go understand it, and if it's something practical, I try to apply it to myself. I'm still young enough. I'm 34, where I can do that. That may not be the case. They might just be like, "Hey, interns, you guys go do this, and let me know how it feels." 10 years from now. But I think point of discomfort, I think that's the biggest one. And then there's obviously so many things that you go to conferences inherently biased, right? By your opinion, you're attracted to whatever, kind of like your echo chamber is. If you like Les
Mhm.
Spellman, you like Les Spellman, so you go to a Les Spellman conference, right? Like you go to a speed conference or whatever. So you're 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 involuntarily or voluntarily going to end up in an echo chamber of what your thoughts and visions are. But hopefully there's one or two speakers, hopefully it's a good enough conference, there's one or two speakers that kind of challenge that common sense, and I think that's what gets me excited. And then obviously building on the knowledge that I have, so taking, you know if like somebody says something that completely makes sense but I haven't thought of it that way, and you're just adding
Mm.
on to my process. So I don't think my process has changed too much, but I've added on my process every year. And I think lastly, right, like the biggest thing with all of this is just don't get complacent with it, right? So continue to go out and seek out those new opportunities of discomfort, the more you can, because even like somebody approached me the other day and said, I actually presented at our own conference at SoCal Sports Clinic last week, and somebody came up to me and said, "Hey, good, nice to see that you're still staying curious." And I was like,
Mhm.
"What do you mean? Like not staying curious?" But like I think what he meant was like so many coaches that end up getting, this is a dream job for me. This is what I want, and I'm good. I don't have to get any better than that. But I think it's
Mm.
it's so important to, get out of that comfort zone and go after more knowledge.
And I think that's, again, that's one thing that I love about this podcast and speaking to so many different people. But even with my own principles and methods, playing devil's advocate with yourself and with others is really important. Like, I know I'm a little bit more fortunate than most that I can speak and have people on that are at the top of their game, so I can just sit back and listen to it. But as well as like so many coaches have so many different methods, and if we were to sit down and again walk each other through all our programming, like we'll find things that we might not agree with, but it's the ability to talk about them civil is what sort of makes us better coaches. And very early on I had this episode with Citri McDonald, and we were talking about like the 95% rule. Like we can agree on 95%, but how we manage the other 5% is what makes us great coaches. And it's that thing of when we're, this industry is kind of going in a way that, again, it's either my way or no way. But the way that we communicate, and this is why I love this podcast, is I've got so many people coming on, so many different views. I'm in no position to be like, I don't agree with that, that's wrong. Like I've not had their mentorship program, I've not had their experiences, I've not got their athletes, I've not got like all these host of things. So I don't know why they've came up with that sort of principle. So I'm going to try and learn as to why they've done it that way. Like
Yeah,
I think that's my job as a host, as someone that's always curious, and like what you're saying is like I'm staying curious. I'm always willing to learn more things and new things. And like sometimes it's just not new things, but it's like the way that you've interpreted that one speaker can be completely different. So then the way you've interpreted it is how you apply it. And then
yeah,
that's completely different to what the speaker said, but it works nonetheless.
yeah. I mean, I agree completely. There's nothing else to be said. Like it's just there's so many different perspectives and viewpoints, and I think the more we get, uh, the better we are. Not only as coaches, but like as people in general. Like it's the same for, take it to politics, take it to
Mm.
whatever you want to take it to. It's the same thing, and I think it's important to note too. Like everybody, there's no malicious intent for any of these
Mm.
coaches or speakers. Like they're not trying to, unless they're trying to get you to buy something. If they're just speaking, they're just sharing their knowledge. And so I think at the end of the day, it's like try to approach it from their lens because they're just trying to put themselves out there and try to, better the field one way or another by how they
Mm.
understand it.
I think one of the best conversations I've had was with Adam Fine. It's something that I've always led my life with, and that's kind of why I got into the industry. It's like your goal shouldn't be to just build out a great program that has winners, that has X pros or whatever. It should be to leave the place a better than you found it. And I think even if you don't achieve something, you can still influence people in a way that changes their life. And I think that's what's amazing about our field is we not only get to be a part of their sport, but we get to be a part of like the human building side of it.
Yeah, I just had I run the internship program here, where I'm one of the people that runs it, and we just finished about week 4 of our internship, and we haven't touched anything on strength and conditioning yet. Like we've just talked about coaching philosophy, training philosophy, different types of athletes, different types of motivations, goal setting, those things, and I think that should be taught. Like that's
Mm.
like the first. That should be your curriculum, no matter where you are, and then actually putting it into practice because a lot of us can just talk about it and then not do it as well, right? And then get on into the weeds of it, the strength conditioning, the squats and the hang cleans and all that stuff.
The time that I'm filming this episode, I had an episode with Madison Peely. She's now at FSU, and she talks about like so she makes every athlete a winter pack. So when they go off home, they've got this pack, and that's what they have to do for when they come back. The interesting thing, and it's something that I was also taught with Coach Mark, is do your own damn program. Like if you can't do your program, like there's something wrong. So she posts it as well. So she'll like do the workouts with their athletes at the same time as they are so that they can see that she's also getting after it. Is that something that you also make sure that you're integrating with your program? Like whatever program is for each team, the interns are sort of having to do it as well.
Yeah, we'll run through basically all of our teams. Then we'll let them program as well a little bit. But yeah, week 1 when they came here, they ran through my football team. Um, week 2, we actually stole a little bit of stuff from our American football people. We did their warm up and their warm up and their ab circuit and all that because selfishly I wanted to know it.
Mm,
The new staff that had just come in was a new staff, and so we were trying to explore a little bit. This week, it's something that I selfishly want to do, and then week 4 will be a different program. It will probably be either women's volleyball or whoever's in town with us right
mm,
now. So, but absolutely, I think the internship itself, like if you're not trying out all these different programs from these different coaches, and especially with us, like we have 6 or 7 people on staff that all have different programming qualities and ideas. So then it's like, how are you supposed to formulate if it's just me telling you what to do? I don't want the interns to be little mini me's. I want the interns to be the
mm.
best coaches. I want them to be better, right? Or hopefully be better than me. So, um, yeah, I love that concept. Coach Peel, shout out to her, Trojan legend. She was with
She
us for
was there
three
as well.
years.
Yes.
Yeah, she was with us for 3 years. So,
Yeah.
so awesome
No,
coach.
she was sick, and we kind of spoke about pathway through S&C, and it's something that when we were on a call with each other, I was like, "Dude, you've earned the right to be there. Like you should be screaming it from rooftops."
Yeah, 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 absolutely.
You said something just now, and I'm always very interested on the Olympic side. Again, American football, it's there's one head guy, and then there's like other people, and we sort of talk and collaborate. How does that happen on the Olympic side when there is different sports, there is different things happening all at the same time? What's your collaboration like there?
Yeah, that's actually something I'm really passionate about because I don't think we do it enough. As not only as a staff here or anywhere, but just as a profession, right? At all. That's why the conferences are so important and so on and so on. But my experiences are a little bit different. Cal State Fullerton was a mid major. We only had myself and my boss, my director Isaac Salazar at the time. or Arjun Dugan when he came in. And so it's a little bit of a smaller staff. We had three GAs under us. And so we could just tell the GAs what we want to do, which is sit in a room and start talking about programming. And it's really easy, right? And so we had really good discussions, and we sort of kind of, we think about topics to talk about, or what's relevant at the time of the field. We were really into, I don't know if you know, like kilo strength society. So we wanted to
Mhm.
build out a kilo strength society kind of program. I still have their rep schemes continuum on my wall, things like that Poliquin based periodization, right? So um, really, really, really into that. And that went really well, right? And when we wanted to go play sports outside, we'd go play different sports. Like our staff played tennis together. We played football together. We played, when spike ball first came out, we were all about the spike ball. But we try to get as many kind of, opportunities for not only development, but just kind of camaraderie, right? And so moving forward, like when you come to USC, it's a little bit harder because every coach now has two or three teams, and they're involved at a super high level with their team, right? So they're at practices, they are in staff meetings, nutritional meetings, whatever it may be, right? Sport coach meetings. And so we don't have as much time, and we're also siloed. Like for us, our basketballs and women's volleyballs and men's volleyballs are over at our Galen Center. Women's football, lacrosse, rowing, swimming, all those teams, diving are here at John McKay. And then we have, our little silos, like our baseball people are going to have their own little baseball offices. I'm going to go down with football and have our own little offices over there. So we're siloed. So it almost feels kind of forced that we have to bring everybody together.
Mm.
So what we're trying to do within our department, just to kind of promote a little bit more congruency, is we're going to start having an education coordinator. And this is something new that we haven't done yet, so I can't speak on the experience of having one. But so we'll have one of our staff, one of our 8 people on staff, will be the education coordinator, and they'll be responsible for presenting new information once a month. And so I think that's going to be huge for us. And then we get to kind of like talk about that. So it's like a coffee and chat type deal where we talk about an article. That's a big one for us. Outside of that, it's really just having the energy to go to somebody's office at the end of the day and then chat. And then sometimes like they have kids, they have this, they have that. So it's really hard. We really have to kind of almost put it at a premium, at a precedent, a priority, right? To
Mm.
be able to go do that and collaborate well, especially if you're not close enough in terms of where your office is. Like our basketball offices are, most big universities are about a mile apart from the Olympic
Uh,
side. So really hard. Um, but yeah, we'll have that. We have monthly staff, or we have weekly staff meetings. And then obviously there's coaches that are always going to have similar ideologies. They're going to bounce stuff off each other a little bit more. And then we do a good job of collaborating on the intern education. So that way they get bounced off, like our ideas get bounced off the interns, which in turn get bounced off to the other coach that's
mm.
teaching them that next week, and so on and so forth, because they'll talk about it that way. So not perfect system by any means, but we're trying to get better at it.
Yeah, no, I think that's what is key as well, is just learning and adapting to what's happening. And again, being that far away from each other does become a hassle. It's like the argument of like you work in a gym, you should be in the gym like all the time afterwards. But sometimes like, you've had a full day in the gym, like the last thing you want to do is be in the gym.
Yeah, a lot of strength coaches that I've seen nowadays actually go work out at like a Planet Fitness or
Mm.
somewhere else because they don't want to work out at work, which is completely understandable.
Yeah, yeah. I think when we're surrounded by all the time, we sometimes just need a break. And I think the more I'm in it, like the weekends tend to be just like my active recovery day. So I'll just go on like a 10K walk or something that's completely different to what I'm used to, like in the gym all the time.
How long does it take you to do a 10K walk?
So I'm also wearing a 20K vest. So I think I'll pull it up. I think it took me an hour and a bit.
Man,
I was doing like 10.3 pace.
okay,
So I wasn't
10.3
walking
per hour.
slow.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
pretty good. It's just moving.
Yeah,
10K.
I wasn't going slow.
Trying to convert it in American standards. That's probably what,
It's
6 miles,
2.2.
6.4.
Yeah, I think so.
No, like 4 point something. in an hour with the 20K vest. That's pretty good.
I'll
That's
check
awesome.
because I don't want to be lying. Uh, sorry, folks. Well,
Intermission.
I really can't find my stuff. I also wish I knew how to work Strava.
Strava is
Like that's
great.
one thing that I'm terrible at. I've also got my issues with Strava. I have issues with a lot of things. Um, for me, Strava is the inability to get your own data from them,
Yeah,
which I have an issue with because again, your data should be your data.
yeah,
Um,
agreed.
so I did. The pace was. I mean, it differed because there were sales and all that, but it was average pace 11.33 kilometers per hour.
That's pretty good. Just
So it
moving.
took me like hour 40 to do 10K.
Yeah, I think it's about 6.2 miles because a
Yeah,
5K is 3.1, so 6.2. That's good. 10-minute mile.
yeah. I try and yeah. I'm chasing after my own dog, so it tends
Ah,
to be a bit faster.
that's awesome. That's fun.
Um, no, it. I also like to do hard shit, and I think kind of goes back to what we were saying about having to do your own program and doing what you're putting out as well. Is like you also get a feeling as to how it feels, but on the coaching side, you actually know when you need to step in with a little bit more encouragement, a little bit more motivation. It's like that's when you need to step up.
Yeah, yeah. I think, and again, when the athletes see it too, right? Like in Coach Peel's example, is like when they see it, like they're now like, okay, if coach can do this, I can do this. I should be able to do
Mm,
this. I'm a Division 1 athlete. You know, coach is a little older, hopefully, right? So it's like, then we gotta, you know, if I can't keep up with him or her,
mm.
then it's over. So I get
Yeah.
that part.
With your other sports, how are you differing soccer to everything else you've got going on?
Yeah. You know, it's really more about like the opportunities that I have in the weight room with them. So for me, like football, for example, is, in season where maybe like once, maybe twice. And out of those two times, it might be a regen session and one like upper corrective or whatever it is. With swim, we're basically Monday, Wednesday, Friday lift, Tuesday, Thursday, dry land as they call it, or conditioning or circuit
Mhm,
based or whatever you want to do on those days. Pretty much, how many weeks is in a year? 55. So we're 54,
mhm,
maybe 53 weeks in a year. We're doing that. So I have them year round. We're fortunate enough to have Olympic athletes and world championship athletes on the team. So it's been a really fun experience of like building the athlete, um, through the weight room, because we have so much opportunity to do things, right? So for a football team, it might be more necessarily skill based, right? Because of how much time we spent in there. For a swim athlete, I always like to think of it, right? Like if you know what like Fergus Connolly's like four coactive model of sport performance. So it's like you have your physical side, you have your psychological, you have your tactical side, and you have your what is it? What's the last one? It was physical, physiological, tactical, and technical, right?
mm.
And so for swimmers, the tactical side doesn't really take as much precedent because there's not really too much tactics involved, right? Like it could be like a little bit of like, oh, how am I going to swim this 100 versus this 200? But I think for them, what the game changer is a little bit more on that physiological side. And so I have the opportunity 5 hours a week to do stuff with them. So it's completely different than my football program in any sense, where we're focusing more on maintaining any general strength capabilities and getting up to some top speed numbers, right? With swim, it's just like, hey, what do you need for you to be able to swim faster in your
Mm.
events? And so the volume and the intensity and the exercise library is completely different. Like we'll do a lot more Olympic lifts, we'll do a lot more velocity based stuff. We'll do a lot more repetitive stuff where it's like, repetitive stuff
Looking
for
at
a
muscle
football team.
endurance.
Yeah, it might be like 3x8 for a football team. It might be like a 4x20 for a swim team, so it's like completely different, the way we work that. But yeah, I think that it's been fun to have both because they're
Mm.
completely different. And so what I'm really looking for is, on the field performance issues, solving those. And then what I'm looking for in a swimmer is more just like, hey, the underlying physiology of like what's under the hood of the car and how can I impact that, to make you better, as a swimmer. So I think like those are my kind of big rocks that I lean
Mm.
on, and it's completely different how you solve those in the weight room.
With swim, obviously loading is a little bit different because they're moving resistance in the pool as well. How are you sort of looking at load management there?
Yeah, so swimming again, inherently aquatic sports are just going to have lower bone density, right? Like just from where we are. So I think for us, like we actually try to attack the weight room more because of that reason, right? So
Mm.
I feel like because we are not able to do, get that stimulus in the pool, in terms of load management, we'll try to attack it on, outside of the pool. So I think that's thing number one. Swimmers are chronically um,
Terrible
fatigued,
mover.
terrible movers, but also fatigued all the time because they spend 20 to 25 hours of the week in the water, 30 if you want to be great. And so, and again, that's up for discussion too, like whether that's a productive amount of volume or not, right? But I think, in terms of load management, we really have to, again, I'm a big proponent of like keep the high days high, keep the low days low. So, like for us, like Wednesdays and Fridays and Saturdays are kind of like our sprint days most of the time in the year. So, we'll make sure to do a little bit more on those days. And on Tuesdays and Thursdays when it's kind of a little bit off, we'll do a little bit less. So, load management wise, that's how we kind of attack that. And then in terms of, the relative volume of a swimmer, like what's good in the weight room, like we'll build that up kind of same deal throughout summer. And swim season ends in about April or May. And we'll try
Mm.
to, if they don't have any international competitions in the summer, we'll build that volume up to where we've done, plenty by the time fall comes. And it is voluntary training. So then I kind of have to rebuild some of that volume for some of them, but some of them
Is
they
it
don't. They'll go
voluntary or
crazy.
is it actually voluntary?
For them it's voluntary because they're not on campus, so it's like,
Okay.
when you're on campus, I don't know if it's really voluntary, but that's a different story. But when you're off campus, it's for sure voluntary
Yeah.
because we can't chase you down, to get you to work out. But
That's one of the
um
biggest lessons I learned
yeah,
in the US is voluntary doesn't always mean voluntary.
I'm sorry that that's the biggest lesson. But it's true too. Like for us, like but our comply, like the collegiate rules are there for a reason.
Mm.
In all honesty, like it's there to protect the athlete, the student athlete, and there's good in that, right? Like, but sometimes, in
You just need
all
to push a
reality,
little more.
like you
Yeah.
just got to push too. So it really depends on situation, sport, everything else in between that.
Um, quick question back on swimmers. They are renowned bad movers, but that does also it's because of how they're having to move in the water, and there's obviously less gravity inside water, so it creates these imbalancements, and a lot of them actually become hypermobile in certain areas. How are you dealing with hypermobility and asymmetries in that sense?
Yeah, great question. I'm under the it really depends. Like it's a case by case basis. Some of them are super hypermobile. Some of them are just a little bit to where it doesn't necessarily matter too much. I think for us, like end shapes, like a snatch is where it shows up the most, like
Mm.
overhead when you're pressing out, right, or doing
And
something
there,
overhead,
yeah.
and then you can definitely see the elbow just go, you right, just a little bit more than it needs to. So for me, like I think it's really super important that when we start working with them, we kind of layer that little eccentric phase, and really go from there to where they're of really aware of how their body moves in a space, right? And so
Mm.
once they're aware of that, then we can start adding, like I don't want to add any speed to it, I don't want to add any load to it, really extreme load, right? I want to see how they move. And once we kind of identify that, somebody's hypermobile, then we start layering on these Olympic lifts and things like that. I have certain cues of where I want them to hit. We have some mirrors in the weight room and things like that, to where we'll actually practice with a mobility stick of where the extension is. So I'm trying not to do too much in terms of, if somebody is very hypermobile, we won't go to that range of motion unless they're super comfortable and that's where they want to be
Mm.
at. But I haven't had anybody with extreme hypermobility and wanting to go in that range of motion when they do their lifts. They're generally going to stop kind of to where the prescribed 90-degree angle is,
Mm.
or whatever it may be, for that lift. So in terms of layering that, that's how we'll do it. And then I'm still curious to kind of look at where like how do they do that? Like, is it because of how they swim underwater,
Mm,
or is it just because that's how they are? Is that a competitive advantage? And if it is, like, how can we, continue to get strong in those ranges of motion
mm.
safely? So that's something I've been thinking about, but it's not something that is like necessarily pressing, because I think for us, even our hypermobility, as long as we're hitting the certain, like shapes that I want them to hit, I'm not necessarily too concerned about it.
I was speaking with a coach in Switzerland. They were actually on the podcast, and she does a lot of work with dancers and gymnasts. Now they are also very inheritedly
Yeah,
hypermobile, and she spoke about how she handles that and how she obviously it's part of the sport to be hypermobile. Like that's a thing that you need to be successful in those sports.
yeah,
She also wants to strengthen that. So yes, be hypermobile, but also let's put some force and some load in there so that you can be there and still not cause damage to joints, to ligaments, to tendons, to everything that sort of encompasses that movement. And again, it goes back to that injury mitigation and how we can further protect our athletes from these high end ranges, because again sport doesn't happen slowly, like sport is
yeah.
explosive. So can we be explosive about it but still be strong enough to not damage?
I mean, in many look like the reason why they have, like, they're good at their sport because of these things, right? So because of
Hmm.
these imbalances or things, so I don't think we should ignore them, and I think we should just encourage them to an extent that is safe, right? So like if it is multi joint or whatever it may be, I think it's good to just explore that and be like, hey, like, you feel good in this range of motion, like, cool, like let's see how we can build on that a little bit more safely, and go from there. And that goes for any sport, swimmers, dancers as well, but even like weird movement capacities that, other athletes have, like whether it's a basketball player, with a little bit more hip abduction than they need or whatever it is. So,
And I think that's why I love these conversations is you get to experience and know different aspects of different sports through the coaches. And again, like you mentioned and alluded to, like there's no right answer. Everything works if you apply it
yeah,
properly.
if you know me, that's like the one thing that I always say. So,
With having swim, I'm a little bit unaware of how their competitive season happens. You've kind of mentioned, is it May? No, it kind of ends April, May.
yeah,
How
so
long?
it'll end like so the collegiate competitive season obviously is we start probably about September ish with our
Mm,
first kind of intra squad meet. There is a mid season component to it, so at about late November, early December, there's a mid season meet that most collegiate schools attend, and that could be a host of, like, let's say USC is hosting 5 or 6 schools, and they come and this is their mid season meet, but it doesn't necessarily count for anything. And then you go up until March, which is like your conference meet. And then you go up until April, which is your NCAA meet. And
mm,
so it's not necessarily one school versus the other. It's more so, can your swimmers hit the marks required for the NCAA meet? That's kind of what we're looking at,
mm,
from a swimming perspective. And then the more swimmers we can get to hit the marks, the more swimmers we have at the NCAA meet. And then the more swimmers we have, the more points. Whoever has the most points obviously wins, in whatever the particular events are for that year. And it's been
mm,
changing a little bit lately, but I think there's about 16 or 17 events currently. And diving is actually a part of it as well. So divers will be under this umbrella as well, and they can actually contribute to your team's points to win. So it's one team, but it's a completely different sport.
yeah,
If that makes sense.
yeah. Do you have the divers as well?
I do. I just got them
Yeah.
this year. I actually did not have them year one, but my year two I got them, and now year three I will have them as well.
How does that differ to I was about to say soccer, football, and swim? Because
Good. I
obviously
mean,
their impact zones are a little bit harsher than most sports.
yeah, they're so interesting. Like, I don't think it similar to maybe a gymnastic sport. In a way, I think you would train. I've never trained gymnastics, but I would imagine it's kind of similar to that. They're basically their strength to body weight ratio is insane. They're generally smaller of stature, right? But just very just kind of built like bricks, right?
Mm.
Ideally.
Stacked.
Um, yeah, yeah, yeah. And so my experience is limited because I've only trained them for 1 year, but we kind of have like this wide range of. They're really elastic, dynamic. Like they can jump out the house. So we do a lot of things to just kind of get them because again, for us, like one of our main goals is as they step on that platform and they jump up from it, the higher they jump up, the more time they have to do their spins,
Mm.
backflips, and whatnot, right? And so one of our biggest goals is just improving that vertical. So they're very elastic to begin with, and then we try to add on a little bit more than that. In terms of injury pathology, it's like lower backs, because of all the somersaults and twists and things like that, and then shoulders because of the entry into the
Mm.
water. So upper body can't be too heavy, or so our coaching staff says, but it has to be strong, right? And so we have to understand that like hypertrophy
Hypertrophy.
is limited. Yes, we're going to be very limited with that team how I approach it. But lower body hypertrophy is decent if we can layer it. And then I struggle because swim is on the other side of that. They're like, we want the pull ups and the presses and everything,
Mhm.
and I can't necessarily do that with my divers. So we just focus on general strength and keep it in that set and rep range.
Mm.
So more plyometrically and then more stability overhead, right? So like entry into the water, and then again just having that core be as strong as possible. So really just hammering anything that kind of gets it going. And I'm not talking about 3 sets of 100 crunches. I'm talking about ab wheels from all the way up to all the way down. I'm talking L-sit holds that are weighted. Things that are actually going to have some intensity,
Mm.
add some intensity to that core.
You've kind of mentioned the differences in coaching and sports. How do you go about talking to the coaches about what they want, what you want to see, and what the athletes want to have as well?
Yeah, this is a great question because I think every staff is different for every sport and every coach. There's certain like cultural things in swimming that are not the same for football, that are not the same for basketballs, that are not the same for like a track and field team. So really kind of knowing the demographic that you're approaching, I think is good. For swimmer, it's like more high energetic. So like for me, like I always get in there. I have a coffee before I go in there, right?
Mm.
Like I'm like, hey, like how's it going, guys? Like let's get it rocking. For our football staff, where I see them all the time because I'm on the road with them and I travel and all that stuff. Sports science and all that kind of takes up some at every practice, everything, right? And so with them, it's more like cordial and understanding like how they, you know, are as a
Mm.
person. And then for our divers, our coach is an OG. He's been here for about 25, 26 years. I try not
Uh,
to bother him too much, but I just ask general questions and then see what else I can get from his assistants. So it's really three different approaches. You really kind of have to be flexible in the way you approach each staff, and then understanding that like each staff has different values and different vocabularies for certain things, right? So again, using swim as an example, like our head coach says, this is my North Star a lot, right? And so for
mm.
me, like when I address the swimmers, I'll be like, if there's a big rock that I want to, shine a light on, I'll be like, this is our North Star for the weight room. And so understanding the terminology that they use and then go from there. And then I think that creates kind of buy-in, right? And
Mm.
once they understand that that you know what they know, or like you understand them, then it's a little bit easier to kind of have an open conversation. Hey, coach, have you ever thought about going down in volume, for our swimmers? Or like, have you ever thought about, adding an extra session for our football players? Same thing with our divers, right? Like, coach, can we like they really crushed today? Can we take it off? I think that really opens that conversation up a little bit. But I think it starts with understanding your audience, and then asking them how you can help, as opposed to going in there and telling them what to do, because that's just not going to work for anybody.
I'm always curious with the Olympic side is the how you're getting the buy-in from the coaches as well, because your job only works if they believe in what you're trying to get their athletes through.
Yeah, you have to be adaptable, like at this level, unless you have one specific sport,
Mm.
and then your personality can be rigid about that sport. You really have to have almost multiple personalities, depending on the day and the mood and everything else, right? Because that's just the way it works. That's the way it's going to work the best.
If you have, obviously you travel with the football, and what's your sort of like key things to take on the road with you to make sure that they have the best um chance to get prepped for the game?
Yeah. I think from a recovery standpoint, I'll cover that first. Like, I think our athletic trainer does a good job. We have like Normatex that we'll take, so like the leg Normatex sides, lacrosse balls, anything like that. We use Fireflies and on flight, which is more like just like a muscle stim in flight, just to promote blood flow. So from a recovery standpoint, that's good. Nutritionally, we also pack a bunch of stuff. So we'll do beet juice, we'll do cherry juice, all that stuff. So I think that's all important. And then I think from my end, I'm more concerned about the game day performance. And it really depends on, again, we talked about like, what kinks in your armor are that week. And then I try to get whatever tools I can. So whether that's like, hey, like we don't necessarily have, if it's like a hamstring, like, okay, we might make sure that I have a couple bands in there, longer bands, so we can do some, kind of resisted or slower hamstring things like that. Right. And then I think for anything else is really just dependent on what I need for that week. And obviously, our standard warm up stuff is just bands, foam rollers, lacrosse balls for foot care, and other things that I can take with me.
SC travels quite a fair distance, so how's that protocols, I suppose, for the SSC in sports science when they're having to cover quite a bit of a distance.
Yeah, so like I talked about, right? Like Fireflies promoting muscle stem on the plane, compression socks, something we've looked into. We're really trying to problem solve. We travel, we don't charter. So for women's football, we don't charter. So we just go public, whatever you want to call it, public transit. So we're not necessarily the most comfortable all the time, but we do end up doing like stretches in the airport, and it is what it is. You see a giant 25 person team, uh, uh, huddled around the luggage compartment, and we're just stretching, and everybody's just looking around, and we have our SC gear on and doing our thing. But like, we try to move as much as we can. Like
Yeah.
from my perspective and our head coach's perspective, that's just what we like. We think movement is medicine, so the more we do it, the better. We'll try to walk around when we get to the hotel or whatever it is. Like we'll have our walks, daily walks, pregame walks, things like that. We're moving every day, and I think that's really the biggest thing. Making sure we touch in sunlight, right? Like first thing in the morning, things like that. So we'll have our, before breakfast, we'll move around a little bit, touch sunlight, make sure we're waking up, especially we're in a different time zone,
Mm.
and then having breakfast and then having our team meeting or whatever it is. So just little things like that. Nothing that is substantially going to make our lives easier. I haven't, I've done my plenty of research on tech that is out there, and
Mm.
they're trying to. They say they're solving all these problems, but I think you just got to keep it to the basics, man. Like, just get out and move. Make sure you're, when the sun is up, you're up. Bedtimes, all that stuff. You try your best.
No, I've been looking a lot of like Normatech and some other companies as well, and I'm not sure as to how much they're actually aiding in some of the things that they're claiming. Now, do they work potentially, and they could be quite good in the 1% differences that we might have to elicit to get to that first place. Um, but do they completely remove DOMs and all this fatigue and from muscles? You
Yeah,
know.
I'm with you. I'm with you. I'm 100% with you. I mean, there are some things, right, that are like pretty thoroughly researched that'll do that stuff, but like a cherry juice, right, like more nutritional base, or
Beetroot as
again,
well. You mentioned beetroot.
yeah, beet and cherry is like something we will hang our hats on every year, and then honestly, if we can, like if it's an intro game, we have a Thursday and a Sunday, like ice baths on Friday. Like
Mm,
I will try to find a place to set up an ice bath on Friday, just so we can have it, because I think it's super important. Some contrast therapy.
hmm. And again, like I'm very fortunate that I get to like collaborate with different companies and different
Yeah,
things. And when I was at university, we ran this like it was really just we were just fucking around, and the lecturer was there to supervise it. But we had a heat chamber, and we obviously did the baseline, and there was like a heat component to it all the time. I think it was 37 degrees, maybe less, maybe just a little bit less, which is hot. Like
yeah,
it's like you're sweating.
yeah.
Um, but we did beetroot and we did cooling systems, and that's kind of like why I agreed to this sort of thing with Apex, Coolabs, and not their
Hmm.
Nardwards, because from my baseline to the cooling, I got 4 minutes on an incremental test extra,
Yeah,
which like that's decent.
yeah, that's
Like
pretty good.
yeah, like it's a K. It's 1 kilogram. I can't remember if we did 1 minute or 2 minutes. I think it was a minute per kilogram, and it, like it's heavy, quick, and heat. But like 4 minutes is good. Like if you can significantly cool the body to prepare for it, it works. Beetroot was 2 minutes, so I also know that it
Mhm.
works. And
Yeah,
you kind of have to prepare yourself for the aftermath, though. I think it can be quite scary if you forget about it. But no, I like to look at these things as well and research, and not just research it, but try it. Like I think research can is great, but it can be averages of averages. So
yeah,
it's kind of like, what can I actually take from it and apply it?
yeah. Again, like we've tried, we've gotten into some rabbit holes, but at the same time, it's like, what's your best kind of return on investment as well? Like, am I
Mm,
going to teach the girls how to do all that stuff? And then how much energy goes into that? How much energy goes into carrying whatever it is that we're carrying? Stuff like that. So I think simple protocols for us just work for now.
mm.
Um, if I was an NBA team and I was traveling all everywhere else, I think I would try everything and anything to do all these things as well.
100%. What's one piece of advice that you would give coaches, younger coaches, or people wanting to come into this industry?
Yeah, I think we're starting to change in terms of what a little background. Like I'm an internship coordinator at USC. I'm an internship coordinator at Cal State Fullerton. So I've seen young coaches for the last 10 years kind of come in and out of the field. Um, One of the things that's changing, in my opinion, is that coaches back 10 years ago and further back down. Again, I'm still young in the field, but they were lacking the X's and O's knowledge.
Mm,
And the X's and O's is like, how do you teach a squat? How do you teach a hinge? What does the program look like? Is it, like is 4x10 enough for an athlete that's in season, whatever it is? And I think now, you know, I think coaches and I don't know if it's iPad babies generation or whatever it is, are kind of lacking the holistic, the human touch and feel to
mm,
coaching, right? And so understanding the emotional intelligence to communicate to a person and come back around. So I think coaches, young coaches, like yes, it's important to be a strength coach in a sense that you know the exercise physiology under it, underlying exercise physiology under it. But like, I think it's even more so important to have the emotional intelligence to understand how an athlete feels that day, how to communicate with them, and then how to relay your program. Because if you don't have that, then it's over for the program. It could be the best program in the world, right? As we know.
mm,
And if there's no buy-in, then you won't get it out of them. So I think the biggest piece for that, I think Jesse Wright, if you know who that is, does a really good job of like understanding or like kind of painting this picture of like what a holistic coach should be that actually looks at not only the strength conditioning part of it, but hey, like what are my mannerisms? How do I act around athletes? How do I act around their other superiors or coaches or whatever it is? How do I be positive, uplifting, all of motivational, all that stuff? I think is missing because now we're just kind of most of our interns are young coaches come in here, and they're yes and they repeat after me type
mm.
people. But how can I have somebody that is going to make this athlete stay better? That's what I'm excited about. So when I see a coach like that, I give him the keys to everything. You
Nice.
know, yeah,
Yeah,
go with it.
100%. And I
Yeah,
think on the other side of that, as interns, it should be your goal to be a sponge and to say yes, sir, but like also ask why.
100%. You got to be curious. You have
Mm,
to be curious, and then we are also going to know what where you are in your knowledge by the types of questions that you ask. So it kind of gives me the feedback loop of like, hey, like I know that this guy doesn't know this about this, so that I know that he's like at this level of kind of his strength conditioning journey, versus somebody that asks like a really good question. I know they're here, so I can give them more things to do.
mm,
So also understanding where you are will help, or like asking the questions will help you understand where you are, and then I can just meet you there and build you up from where you need to go. I think that's another big important one. But if you don't ask any questions, then I don't know where you
mm.
are.
100%. No, I appreciate you for coming on today and spending some time getting to talk about SNC and the the way that you formulate it at USC. Again, I just love talking, so it's a pleasure.
Yeah, thanks for having me, man. This was great.
No, it's all good. If you can link people to where they can reach out and sort of ask questions if there's anything that sort of comes up for them.
Yeah, if you're old school and you want an email, go Beljic at usc.edu. So Beljic at usc.edu. My last name. And if you just want to link up on IG, ask any questions, I'll promise I'll try to get him. It's Bell Jones, so Beljone on Instagram. So Beljone.
Perfect. Again, appreciate you so much and hopefully talk soon. Peace.
Thanks, Manny. See ya.